Is the Yellowstone supervolcano really due for an eruption? Yellowstone supervolcano last erupted 70,000 years ago. Will it erupt again anytime soon? Of course, the eruption of 70,000 years ago was not a super eruption, it was a lava eruption, though. Beneath Yellowstone National Park, a vast region of spectacular wilderness, visited about 3 million people by 3 million people annually, lurks one of the largest volcanoes in the world. It's one of the somewhat 21 supervolcanoes on our Earth, and it has about 10,000 hydrothermal areas and over 60% of the world's geysers. The Yellowstone caldera, the cauldron-like basin at the summit of the volcano, is so colossal that it's often called the supervolcano, which according to the Natural History Museum in London means that it has the capacity to produce a magnitude 8 eruption on the volcanic explosivity index, discharging more than 1,000 cubic kilometers or 240 cubic miles of material. To put it into perspective, the 1991 eruption of Pinatubo in the Philippines, arguably the most powerful volcanic eruption in living memory, was rated 6 on the volcanic explosivity index, making it, according to the Natural History Museum, around 100 times smaller than the benchmark for a supervolcanic eruption. Is Yellowstone due for an eruption? Media reports have often claimed that Yellowstone is due to erupt. They claim that because the last eruption of the supervolcano was 70,000 years ago, it's bound to blow soon, but that's not how volcanoes work. According to Michael Pollan, the geophysicist in charge of the Yellowstone volcano, he says this is perhaps the most common misconception about Yellowstone and about volcanoes in general. Volcanoes don't work on timelines, Michael Pollan explains. He's the scientist in charge at Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. He said they erupt when there is enough eruptible magma underneath the surface, and pressure can cause that magma to ascend. Neither condition is in place at Yellowstone right now, he says. It's all about that magma supply. Cut that off and the volcano will not erupt. Many volcanoes go through cycles of activity and inactivity, Pollan said. More often than not, a volcano's activity is a direct consequence of the magma supply. Some volcanoes do seem to have regular eruptions, but this is because the magma supply is relatively constant. Think Kilauea in Hawaii or Stromboli in Italy, Pollan said. So where does this idea of Yellowstone being overdue for an eruption come from then? Pollan said, I suspect the overdue idea comes from the concept of earthquakes. Earthquakes happen as stress accumulates on faults, and in many places this stress accumulates at relatively constant rates due to, for example, plate motion. That being the case, you might expect earthquakes to occur at somewhat regular intervals. And this, of course, more complicated than that. There are many variables at play, but for that reason, it makes more sense to say that a fault is overdue for an earthquake. Pollan has noted that supervolcanoes, a term he considers somewhat crude and sensationalist, are no more or less temperamental than other volcanoes. So how do experts keep an eye on Yellowstone subterranean activity so that in the case of a major volcanic eruption, warnings can be given? Yellowstone is very well monitored by a variety of techniques, Pollan said. It's covered in terms of seismicity and ground deformation. We track the temperatures of some thermal features, although this is not an indicator of volcanic activity, but rather of the behavior of specific hydrothermal areas. We look at overall thermal emissions from space, collect gas and water to assess chemistry over time, and track steam and river flow and chemistry. So what might indicate that a massive eruption is imminent? Having thousands of earthquakes in a short period of time, in a few weeks, with many felt events, would be noteworthy, as long as it was not an aftershock sequence from tectonic events, Pollan said. That seismicity would need to be coupled with really extreme ground deformation, tens of centimeters over a short period of time, park-wide changes in geyser activity and thermal and gas emissions, the ground rising and falling normally by 2 to 3 centimeters every year, and there are typically 2,000 earthquakes annually in the area, so it would have to rise far beyond these normal background levels, he explains. While Yellowstone is relatively stable right now and has not displayed any unusual seismic activity lately, if it were to erupt, the consequences could be extreme. Volcanologists have suggested that the ramifications they are most concerned about is wind-flung ash, which could end up coating a surrounding region 500 miles or so across in more than 4 inches of ash. This could, experts predict, result in a short-term destruction of Midwest agriculture and would leave scores of watercourses clogged. According to the U.S. Department of the Interior, the surrounding states of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming that are closest to Yellowstone would be affected by pyroclastic flows, while other places in the United States would be impacted by falling ash. Poland added that the effects would also be felt beyond the United States borders. If there were a very large explosive eruption, it could impact the global climate by emitting ash and gas into the stratosphere, which could block sunlight and lower global temperatures by a few degrees for a few years, Poland explains. Research published in the journal Science in December 2022 found that the Yellowstone caldera holds more liquid molten rock than previously estimated, given that volcanoes tend to erupt only when a vast amount of magma is readily available. Should this finding be a cause for concern? This research really just confirms what we already know about Yellowstone, Poland said. Initial findings were that the magma chamber beneath Yellowstone was only 5 to 15% molten. The new research, which uses more advanced techniques but the same data, suggests it's closer to 16 to 20% molten. So there's more molten than they originally thought there was there. The take-home message is that the magma chamber is mostly solid, and that means there is far less likelihood of a consequential eruption. I find this result reassuring. This is by John Fellon of Live Science. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box.